Welcome, everybody. This is the Form Check Roundtable Seminar. It's kind of a cool one. We thought about it. We were thinking about some more interesting, more engaging seminar formats. And this one was, I think, one of the more exciting ones. It's kind of cool. We didn't really prep for these, although we did get them in, and we had them in a little group chat. But I don't think any of us took time to analyze them beforehand. So they should be pretty fresh. We'll take a look. We'll all discuss it. And we'll also record this for later. So if you guys want to take a look at it for reference, it's like a sneak peek into how we do this. We do this in our weekly coaching meetings as well with client videos. There's a kind of a sneak peek into how we all analyze lifts and how we do it for each other, for ourselves, which I think is a really helpful tool if you want to move forward and analyze your own. So let's start it off with our first submission from Andrew. So Andrew, I don't know if your mic is working, but I noticed earlier today that there's multiple videos here. You want us to check out all of them or mostly squat? Do you have a preference?
I guess the deadlift one. I think it's like the second.
Deadlift one?
Yeah.
Let's do it. All right. Nice.
Okay.
Guys, if you want to see something, let me know. I could pause it somewhere. Multiple heavy reps. It's always helpful. Good. All right, I've got a couple thoughts. Everybody else have something?
Yeah, you go first.
I'll go first. So one of the first things I'm going to point out, I'm just going to point out one thing, and it's at the top. I'm going to see if I can pause it. I just missed it. You guys see that?
Yeah.
One very important thing that's actually gotten me personally in competition before, and I've seen it get some really good lifters in competition. There it is. At the top, when you lock out, your knees ever so gently unlock. It might be a shift forward. It might be a slight unlock. In the lockout, you do something I really like, Andrew. You push the bar forward. If I was to trace the bar path, you'd see it go straight up and then notch a little bit forward, which is really nice because that means at the top, even in submaximal weight, you're working your glutes to tuck the pelvis a little bit and really lock in that weight. But if you do that on a maximal lift, if you don't contract those quads and lock out those knees really hard, if they unlock, that'll be the beginning of a kind of a chain, what's the word I'm thinking of? Of like a domino effect that can pull the weight back down before you get the down command.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
What do you guys think?
Yeah, kind of. I don't know. I guess I'll need to try it out.
Here, let me show you one more time. Okay, that one didn't do it. Let's go back to the first one. You see that? I wouldn't call it an exaggerated lockout, but you see forward movement in the knees, which you have to be careful about.
Yeah, I can definitely see that.
The Cramsey lockout.
Is that a Cramsey move?
Yeah. I think it.
You kind of pulled straight up, so you didn't have that knee issue. Go ahead, Joe.
No, I was gonna say I think it. If I had to take a guess as to where that's coming from, there's a lot of foot pressure shifting around as he gets past the knee, from the toe back to the heel, back to the toe. Kind of just a lot of movement there.
So the one thing I'm seeing is like I can see it looks like on the start position his shoulders are just a little too over the bar. I think you could probably get those like shoulder blades over the bar a little more, and you can sort of see that bar path shifts a little bit. So there you can sort of see it's coming back on more of an angle rather than straight up and down. On that setup, I would try to get those a little bit more of a hip hinge and slightly less squatty. Sort of like there's quite a lot of knee bend there. Try to get that hip hinge back a little more, and then as you're initiating the pull, trying to get those shoulder blades set a little harder and staying over that bar a little more. That's probably the only thing that I can see, like with that bar path kind of like veering backwards.
Really clean deadlift, by the way.
Yeah, I don't know. I think the bar path, I think it looks all right.
Yeah, you know, with these videos, the side video is good for bar path, but it can almost backfire if it's not dead on to the side, then
Mm,
it becomes almost like an optical illusion, right? Where you can't really tell if it's a linear bar path or not. And even the
yeah.
tracing apps don't do a great job unless
There's
it's
yeah, there's definitely apps you can get on the phone on your phone that you can see where that bar path is tracking. It's more so probably useful for squat and bench, but
Mhm.
if you kind of I always look at the white part of the middle of the barbell there, like where it says power bar, and usually that you can if you just take have a look at that, you can usually see where that bar is shifting. It's not too bad, but
And I do know that when I set up, my shoulders aren't like perfectly aligned with the bar, and they are a little more
so
forward.
one thing I always look at is the crease of the armpit. So that's usually like if you can see that crease of the armpit is in line with the bar, usually you know that that's like a pretty good place to start. If it's slightly over the bar, usually you want to try to get that crease of the armpit kind of in line with the bar. It's not too bad. It's just like a little tiny bit like forward, but that would maybe something to look at.
Yeah. Cool. Well,
Technically, it's pretty solid though.
I think we should probably move on.
That's just me being picky.
One other thing I'd like to add after hearing the advice about the shoulder placement, one thing you can see in this angle really well is, okay, if you look at this area here, underneath the armpit, you see the shirt wrinkling, right?
Mm.
So what you might be able to do is pull the shoulder blades down in this position here during the brace. And if you bring those shoulders down, it does a couple things. First of all, it will get you in slightly better positioning. And if you say, Andrew, that you struggle with shoulder positioning over the deadlift, pulling the lats down hard and depressing the shoulder blade can help you get in there. And then there's a second thing that's really beneficial. It shortens the lever arm between the hip and the upper back, right?
Right.
And that's a really advantageous thing to do for deadlifts. Some of the best deadlifters in the world have these freaky short torsos. And so if you're a long torsoed individual, there's not much you can do, but one thing is, I don't know how well I can be seen right now. You guys see me?
Yeah.
Pulling those shoulder blades down like this.
Right.
And
Yeah, I mean, a good cue for that is kind of like imagining you have an orange underneath your armpit and you're like trying to squeeze that orange, make juice. So like trying to keep those arms a little tighter and like try to really squeeze that armpit nice and tight.
You could try a
That could
little.
help.
You could try a little elbow rotation too. Might help.
Yeah, for sure.
yeah, but that's an advanced tip. This is not one-on-one stuff. So I like that first video. We're getting into the interesting things. Sweet. Ready to move
I
on?
think what Jordan was saying with the armpits, squeezing the armpits, it might also help with like I think that the upper back versus the lower back, the upper back looks like it's still trying to be neutral, but the lower back has some flexion in there. I think if you squeeze your armpits, you might actually be able to get away with the opposite, where you have a more neutral lower back and more rounded upper back, and that might actually help you. Um, get more, I guess, stacked with your shoulder blades. Your shoulders, your arms, and the bar all being in line. I think what Jordan was saying might switch that neutrality towards your lower back, and might I don't know if you have any lower back problems or something. I have lower back problems, so that's always usually the first thing that my mind goes to because anytime I see a lot of lower back flexion throughout the range of motion, it's not always a bad thing, of course, but if you can work to make it more neutral and let the upper back take all the rounding portion of the motion, of the
So
lift
to
it.
summarize, knees at the lockout, shoulder position over the bar, and some kind of advanced bracing. Work on that low back and to get that shoulder position correct. Cool. So let's go ahead and move on. We got a video from Jin. I requested a heavier video, but I didn't get that. But I think we'll be able to get some good. I think we'll get some good looks on this one. I forgot it's a single rep, but I can also move around here, which is nice.
Go back to the beginning again,
Before the walkout.
like when he first starts the descent.
I think it looks pretty solid, man.
Yeah,
This is a very John Hack squat.
Yeah, obviously he's more of a high bar. I mean, I coached Jin for a while. I was his first coach. But one of the things that we had, he didn't really suit low bar. So this is kind of like more of a high bar / mid bar position. But yeah, this is looking pretty solid.
the
One of
only.
the things that
Oh, go ahead.
it's sort of hard to tell when the weight is this light. This looks like a third last warm up or something. But if we maybe had a slightly heavier video, we'd be able to kind of see maybe some technical breakdown. But I know that one of the issues Jen used to have was he liked to extend back into the bar too much. So that thoracic used to, I mean, one of the cues that I think he used to think too much about was chest up, which I tried to stop. But I noticed when he'd get to the bottom of the squat, his first sort of first reaction would be to try to really drive the chest back, and that bar path would kind of go back over the heel too much. But this is definitely looking a lot better to what it used to be.
I was going to say the same thing. I remember that from Jen. This looks a lot better.
Yeah, and I was gonna say if I'm gonna be real, if I'm looking for anything to criticize, because there's really not much. I think there's a slight lag in your torso angle. So like you start going down and then you're really upright, and then eventually, so it's either a lag in the torso angle or it's some kind of bracing flaw when you hit the hole where you got to get pushed forward a tiny bit. And I'm being extremely nitpicky here. Is if I'm looking for something that would probably be the only thing that I could give you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm going to go with like a higher level critique of the John Hack squat in general, right? So the John Hack squat is an upright, kind of high bar, quad dominant squat. I would say fast on the descent. And I would say typically, if you're not John Hack, you're probably going to either make the lift or you're going to fail fast, right?
Right.
So
That's the thing with a lot of squatters like this is they have such a massive drop off. Is you see John Hack, in his meets, for example, like he'll hit his opener and it looked like he could hit that for 8 reps,
right.
and then he adds 20 kilos and fails.
Right.
And I feel like Jin was the same thing. He used to have a big drop off as well. Like, we'd add 5 kilos on a single and then it'd go from an RP6 to an RP9 real quick.
Right.
Yeah. So I mean, I agree 100%. I spent the year doing high bar before that last meet, and the drop off is ridiculous. And I think the main issue that I would run into once it got heavy was my torso angle. I just couldn't
Yeah.
hold the position once it got heavy enough. And it would cause me to either grind a rep that shouldn't be grinded or to fail every single time.
Right.
And the demand there is just really high. So I think when you're doing the submax stuff, if you could really hone in exactly where your torso should be and hold that position, if you're going to do this as a competition stance, you want to do that. It'll mean you can potentially grind out reps that you wouldn't get otherwise. And I'm speaking from experience just personally, but yeah, every time I would fail, it was because I just couldn't hold that position. Like it was, near impossible to hold.
And just
Yeah.
a little bit of background on that. One of the reasons why we do a low bar squat and we don't do such a quad dominant squat. And don't get me wrong, I'm a fan of the quad dominant squat. I've coached it for years, but that's mostly in opposition to the old school super hip dominant squat.
Right.
And not quite this new school, very upright squat. So the idea here is this relies so much on the quads that you reduce the influence of the other muscles. And that means that you have kind of a small zone where you can make the lift. If you shift some of that load to your glutes, to your erectors, to your posterior chain, you have more muscle, more fiber behind the lift, and you can achieve a lower V1RM, a lower velocity at 1 rep max. And the lower
Right.
V1RM means with the same amount of muscle, the same cross-sectional area, the same number of muscle fibers, the same thing, you should be able to squeeze more out of that strength and increase 1RM, right? So theoretically, if Jin were to move from a hyperquad dominant stance to incorporate some other muscle groups a little bit more, you should be able to, without gaining any extra strength, lower that V1RM and increases max.
Yeah. But
I think also in a high bar squat like this, or similar to high bar squat like this, one of the problems which Joe was talking about, like the torso not being able to hold up, is to do with like the upper back tightness. I think his shoulder blades, he's trying too hard by himself to keep his shoulder blades together to the point where if there's any, I don't know how he squats when there's heavier weight on the bar, but usually what I've noticed with myself or others is that once you have heavier weight, once you try and hit the hole, because the weight tips you forward, usually in a high bar, it's more likely that a weight tips you forward once it gets heavy enough. It opens that shoulder blades that you've pinched together, and that just starts getting worse and worse as it gets heavier, which is why there's suddenly it just breaks down in the hole and there's nothing you can do. So one of the things maybe is to, I don't want to say relax the upper back, because the upper back tightness is useful in a squat because you don't want your back to move, but maybe it looks like his arms are squished together very, very aggressively. Maybe if he let loose a little tension there and gave his body a little bit more, upper body a little bit more room to uh, take the load a little bit more than just like being a hard, rigid body and then everything falling on the legs, it might be a little easier in the hole to work his way around the weight. I think it's too stiff enough.
Cool. I think we move on to the next one. I think we have a series of Jen videos. So we're going to go through, we got deadlift. That's not her. Where's Jen's other videos? We got bench and we got squat. Let's go in order. Squat, bench, deadlift. All right. Okay.
Yeah. So this is a heavy single. Yeah, so there's a couple of things I'm seeing here.
A couple of things. I'm going to let it play through a few more times. Shane, you can go ahead.
So one of the first things I'm seeing is the bar is kind of starting a little too far over the heels, probably not quite over the midfoot. And second one, probably the main one that I see is that pelvis is just like, it starts in a good position and then it really rotates back and kind of ends up way too far behind her as she's hitting the bottom of the hole. So it starts good and then kind of like it looks like she's trying to sit back too much into the squat. And I think the combination of those two things, with the bar not starting over the midfoot, you can see that bar position starting more over the heel and then it's drifting forward. That and the combination with her sitting back too much and not really kind of sitting down is causing too much of a good morning squat. And you can see those hips just want to shoot up and that chest falling forward, which is probably fine now. And I don't know if Jen's had any injuries with her like lower back or hips or anything like that, but if all of your squats are like that, and I know that Jen trains at a really high intensity all the time, that's, I don't know, that could just be like an injury waiting to happen. I don't know if anyone else has any.
I definitely see what you're saying. What I find interesting is the shift in knee and hip position. Oh, I can scrub. Wonderful. From here to here.
Right.
So
yeah, you can really see those hips just shoot straight up. Because you can see as soon as she hits the bottom of the hole, that bar is shifting forward, wanting to search for that midfoot. And then as soon as those hips, as soon as she hits the hole to come up, those hips just shoot up, and you can see that chest and the hips position is just way off.
Yeah.
Play now.
So, by the way, Jen, welcome back. We just finished reviewing your squat.
Oh yeah, I'm listening.
No, I'm sorry, Jen, not Jen. Jen just came back.
I'm sorry. It sounds the same.
Yeah, no, Jen. Although I'd like to hear what some of your thoughts about your squat and what you might want to get some feedback on.
Are you talking to me or Jen?
Yeah, this is for Jennifer now.
Okay. Yeah, so that's very helpful. These are issues I've had for a long time. Quite honestly, my hips are not shooting back or up as bad as they used to be. So this
Okay.
is much better. And I can tell when I'm coming up, if I hit a slow spot, that means my hips are way behind me. And on this squat, I didn't hit a slow spot at all. It just went, for me, I could feel the bar on my back just going straight up. I didn't have to really push hard to get it up
Right.
through that slow spot that I'll hit when my hips are way back.
Yeah. I mean, I think you'll find that your ceiling will be much higher in terms of how much weight you can push on those singles if you could keep your hips under you a little more and not have so much shifting as you're coming into the bottom of the squat. You can try to keep that pelvis under you as you're pushing and just driving through the floor. I know you can grind reps, but your ability to grind will become much higher.
Yeah. So, my overall philosophy on squats like this is, I used to think that with the squat being a quad dominant movement, which it is, there's a lot of biomechanical research involved that has come to the conclusion that the hamstring is essentially neutral in the squat. It's one of few muscles that has a connection at two different joints at the bottom and at the top. And so as the hamstring lengthens at the hip, it shortens at the knee. And so since we know that force produced from muscle is from a change in length of that muscle, if you have a reduction in length at one side and an increase in length at the other side, the contribution to a movement is not great, right? So that's just a general rule in the squat, but you could change that a little bit by being more quad dominant or more hip dominant. So in a squat like this, you are taking a movement, which generally is a quad dominant movement, and shifting it to a hip dominant, posterior chain dominant, hamstring dominant movement. So biomechanically, I believe you have much more force production if you were to embrace more of a quad dominant lift. But the caveat here is that is not for everybody. And I think that's something I've learned over the years as I've kind of grown as a coach. Some people are just going to play to their strengths. And I think, Jennifer, you are likely a much stronger hip dominant squatter than quad dominant. Now, that being said, if we're to embrace that fact, one of the changes I would make is reduce such a drastic change in position, right? So you come down like a quad dominant squatter, and then you transition to that hip dominant position really quickly. Now, where you can get caught, you mentioned a slowdown, is if you transition to the hip dominant position really quickly, that's a lot of horizontal movement with very little vertical movement. And that can make it really easy to get into a wrong position, or just like a mechanically disadvantageous position. So I would suggest the opposite of what I would normally suggest. Start with a little bit more, pull the hips back a little bit more in the descent phase of the squat, in the eccentric phase. That way you can more closely mirror your squat. So a good squat should have a mirror image in the eccentric and the concentric. So prepare for that concentric phase in your eccentric. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
Any other thoughts? No, I like that. I think if, I've worked with Jennifer a lot. And yeah, I think if you're not going to fully commit to trying to embrace a quad dominant squat, that Jordan's advice is good advice.
Well, I'm committed to embracing it. It just doesn't happen.
Yeah.
I don't know how to do it.
What are the cues? Just out of curiosity, Jen, what are the cues you're thinking about as you're descending into the squat? Like, are you thinking about, like, I don't know, opening the hips, like sitting back, or what's some of the
Thinking
things
a
that you're
lot
thinking
about
about?
keeping the knees forward, getting the knees forward on the descent and keeping them forward as long as I can.
Yes.
That's the main thing I've been working on.
Good.
And then also keeping the weight on my foot mid-foot.
So
Sure.
This is one of those things, and Jen, you've heard me say this a billion times, but I think this is where programming comes into play, right? Because, or just, what's the word here? Periodization, right? Or phase potentiation, whichever one you want to use. But basically a period of time where you're working with weight at a threshold where you can implement that change, right? You're competitive, you're nationally ranked, you're highly competitive. So you're on a meet schedule, right? A constant meet schedule. It makes it really difficult to have that period of time to make these changes, to implement the change. Because if you strip that bar to 70 kilos, I bet $100 that you could maintain that quad dominant position, right? It's just where you run into trouble is when it gets heavy. And if you have a strict meets schedule, then it's going to be hard to implement that, because it does take, the unfortunate truth is it takes a scaling back and a long period of time to work on that change and implement the change and have it be so ingrained that when you start doing heavier stuff, you're able to do it, right?
Yeah.
Does that make sense? You've heard me say this.
Yeah, I did that for 6 months. And then when I got to, 1 rep max, my hips shoot back.
Yeah. Well, then,
So it's like, at like 120, I can make it look really good.
right.
Have you tried implementing like different variations like
Yeah.
at a much lighter load, like a tempo squat or a pause squat or something like that, to kind of get a little more practice at that? Like, because I know for a lot of people, like tempo squats, for example, like you can feel like your midfoot a little more. You can kind of think about what you're doing on the way down.
The positions,
And something like a tempo or a pause squat or a tempo pause squat can give you that positive or negative feedback loop if you're not doing it right. So something like that I found is really helpful for a lot of people that have kind of bad habits that they do and like squat and bench and things like that. So like super sub max, 50 to 65%, and just like drilling that position and drilling those cues could definitely help.
Yeah, and we're gonna move on to the next video. Just to quickly kind of get some high level thoughts. Jen, a couple things. Joe made a really good point that the Mr. Miyagi kind of wax on, wax off, right? Practice the positions a lot and you can employ them. I think the problem is if you've tried that for 6 months and you still didn't make progress, there's 2 points to be made. First point, you have to develop a lot of quad musculature to combat the fact that you have incredibly strong, incredibly developed muscles in the positioning that you use here, right? So 6 months, although it sounds like a long time, that's enough for skill adaptation, but for muscular adaptation, you might need to commit to a longer period. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean you have to Mr. Miyagi it for a long time. You could just try, for a year or 2 years, do a really heavy accessory of SSBs, for example, or high bar squat or front squat, right? And then over those 2 years, you're still competitive. You're still training your back squat as normal in your strong positioning. You develop those quad muscles, you pull them up in strength, and then over time, you might be able to meet your squat in the middle, right?
And I think that's the main issue. It's going to take a really long time to make those a little bit more equal.
Right. And then another important point is it's hard to unlearn at your stage. Really hard to unlearn. I could take somebody, with this squat, if it's their first week of training, and fix it in their second week of training. But it's so tempting to lift a lot more weight with the position that you've been training at for so long. It's a big psychological barrier. And it's subconscious as well. Your body wants to be in a place it's strongest.
I think SSB is a great option. I also really like Hatfields because you have like something helping you, feel yourself, your weight where the load is, and take it a little slower so you can do really tempo, and you can go really heavy with Hatfields. So being under those loads, and I think having the hip under your, like the feeling of the hip under you, and using your quads, I feel like with Hatfields also really blows up, at least from what I've seen.
Definitely. All right, let's go ahead and move on. I think we've been spending more time than planned on videos, so maybe we could speed them up a little bit. Let's see if we can get this bench one done a little quicker than the squat one. Okay. I'd say more traditional on bench than on squat for sure.
Definitely, yeah. I really like this. I think that looks really solid. Bar path looks really good. You're holding your chest position really well at the bottom. Like there's no collapse. Your leg drive looks really good. Maybe one thing could play around with, maybe bringing your feet, maybe. I think they don't look too bad, but yeah, I like how this looks.
Yeah, I think bench actually looks really good. The only criticism I have here is a lot of extraneous movement with the bar in your hand. You touch the chest, it rolls forward. You press up, it rolls back. There's just a lot of movement there.
Great point. I didn't catch that. Yeah, you could tell there's hand movement going on.
Which is,
Yeah, it's
probably
harder,
just
a little
a
harder to see from this angle, but
Yeah.
I can see what you mean.
How do you improve that control?
That is usually a grip issue. I know you and I have worked on bench and we've done
I think I'm doing the grip you taught me.
yeah, so this is one of those this is one of those tough coaching things that there's no like magic solution for, because it really is just the bar moving in your hand. And my answer to not do that is to stop doing that. Which you could try squeezing the bar a little bit tighter. The one thing that I've had a pretty good success rate with on this is to pay attention to actually what your wrist is doing, right? So when we do the internally rotated grip and we have the bar forward on our hand, we have to make sure your wrist stays in this extended position. So in my experience, most of the time when people have this issue where the bar is rolling a lot, their wrist is actually changing position, right? So when you touch the chest, your wrist might roll forward a little bit. And then when you press, the wrist might come back. So if you continue having this, I would really focus on just trying to maintain this extended position the entire time. And you might get a little success on that.
Yeah, I would say what Joe's mentioning is just that it's such a proprioceptive issue. There are so many people, and Joe included, when I was coaching Joe back in the day, he had a wrist and elbow thing where the wrist position would cause one of the elbows to be more internally rotated than the other one. And it was a battle of getting Joe to feel it happening. Because if he could feel it, he could change it. But if you're benching, imagine knowing where your elbows are. It's one of the hardest things to propriocept, right? The position of your elbows during the bench. You're looking straight up, you're thinking about pushing this weight, and there's really just not that much to feel in the elbow. Not unless you got like huge lats or like maybe really large shoulders or something. So, getting a good video of your hand positioning could really help. But other than that, yeah, just knowing it's happening is the first battle. And I would also say in your bench, very good. The bar path is fantastic. One of the best bar paths I've seen. One thing that I did notice is look at your knees this whole time. Look at your legs. You guys notice anything?
You can tell her quads are like tight. Like you can tell
Keeping
that she's like,
a lot of tension there.
A lot of tension, but there's no movement from the beginning. I don't see the unrack, but one thing that I like to coach is when you're locked out, take a big breath, and then after that, push really hard into your positioning, because it's difficult to be in the right position during the unrack and before the brace, and you have to brace the rack. So
yeah, there's some really consistent leg drive there, which is good.
Yeah, the leg drive
can be hard to coach. That can be hard to coach for some people. A lot of the time, you'll see people that like 30%, intensity on their leg drive on the unrack, and then when they bring the bar to the chest, then they try to use as much leg drive as possible, and a lot of the time, those hips will move around on the bench too much.
Yeah, it's contrasting views. I think it's important to really lock in the arch and the leg drive and everything after you take your breath before you press. So that's one thing that you could try. But otherwise,
what do you mean? So at that point, you like push the knees out? Is that what you're saying, Jordan?
So I like to think, don't think about the knees or the legs at all. Think about the arch, right? So what you want to do is you want to push the hips towards your back and then really tighten that arch up. So, I mean, it could be minimal. It could just be enough. The idea is to pull the sternum up towards the shoulders, right? And that's really the main thing we're trying to accomplish with bracing is in the bench press, better positioning and a little bit of tightness. Not as much tightness as the squat, more positioning in bench. So that's what I suggest, but it's not for everybody. I mean, your bracing is really good. You can see your quads flex the whole time. Bar path looks great. So that's just something you might want to try, but also don't fix what ain't broken, and your bench looks really good. Does that make sense? Did I answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, let's go ahead and move on to the next one. You know what? I was going to guess that your deadlift was really solid when I saw your squat. Because
I
you
was going
squat
to mention
like
that.
a
I was
deadlift.
going to mention that she's got a strong deadlift, which kind of explains why she has a tendency of wanting to use her posterior chain more in the squat.
So look at this. Right here, this is your squat position, more or less.
Yeah,
Hold on.
exactly.
Pull the knees back, hips pretty far back. I think you squat your squat borrows from your deadlift. But yeah, fantastic deadlift. So you like the breath at the top, huh?
Yeah, I started doing that last spring just to simplify. I don't know what her name is. She goes by Meaty on Instagram, Joe's Lifter.
Maddie. Maddie. Yeah.
Maddie, she was doing that, and I really liked it because it sort of simplified the start to make it really clean. So then I could just focus on sort of thoracic extension and getting my lats tight and pushing through the ground and having that breath before all of that, so that I could just have a really clean setup. So I really like that. And that French lifter, Leah, she lifts that way too. She's really strong. So I
Yeah,
like it.
you guys have a very similar looking deadlift.
So
Yeah.
Go ahead, Joe.
No, I was gonna say I use that as a tool for lifters who have a hard time finding their start position. And when you and I first started, I mean, way back when we first started kind of loosely working together, I remember that was, you were kind of struggling with where your hip should be.
Where to set them, yeah.
Yeah, and I think this works really well for you. I mean, to be honest, I think, you've come a long way. Like, it looks way better. Maybe eventually you would want to, like, in the off season, experiment with some contrast bracing, but so far you've made a ton of progress on this, and I've seen it from the beginning, so I think it looks really good. But
Yeah, I mean, this was like that max I did with you back then, and now it's super easy.
Yeah, I just wanted to make the point that why I have certain athletes do that is specifically for ones that I have an issue finding their hip position, the start position for when they pull.
Which I definitely struggled with. Is the contrast bracing, like a superior way to do it necessarily, or not necessarily?
Jordan and I are definitely going to differ on this. I don't think one is necessarily better than the other. I think if you're really good at the contrast bracing and know how to use it properly, you're going to be able to get more out of it. But I've, in my 5 years of doing this now, have found a lot of people really struggle with figuring out where to start the pull from, and then it can end up causing more problems than not. This is one of those things that is a high variability based on the individual. Like, if somebody's really comfortable with their start position and super consistent, I would probably push them to start experimenting with contrast bracing and slack pulling and really trying to leverage that start position as best as they can. But if you have issues with your hips and your start position, I would probably continue to avoid it until you're like, you know, you could just do it without even thinking about it.
This did get, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, what I was going to say is, because Joseph, we might differ. I don't think we differ so much. I teach that as kind of my default, but that's mostly because contrast positioning is helpful for the beginner, right? Feeling two different positions helps you feel the better position, right? So
Okay,
it's difficult if you start in a spot to know if that's the right spot, right? But if you start forward or if you start with your back arched and then you pull back and you flatten your back, right? If you go from arch to flatten, you're flat, right? Also, it's the version that we teach. I think, it's an advanced method of bracing for the deadlift. It's difficult. And I would say if I was to go back and do it again, and I think Joe and Shane and Nikhil have been doing it more so this way lately, pull back on the complexity in the beginning, right?
Yeah.
But that being said, you're not a beginner lifter, and so you might want to play with the complexity. But if you have before and you've had difficulty finding your starting position, then I don't think it's one of them is clearly better than the other. I agree with Joe on that. One thing I would note though,
Yeah.
about the way you decide to pick your starting position is, so you do it blind, right? And
Yeah.
you actually don't even look down.
I started doing that because I prefer not to look down because it helps me keep my upper back tight.
Yeah, I mean,
When I bend over, I'm getting all loose in my back.
the cynic in me would say you could look down and get tight, right? You could,
It's true.
but everybody to each their own. And I don't necessarily mind it. You do a really good job with it. I would say, if I'm really picking here, if you look at the beginning of the lift, let's let the train pass. So there's a little bit of oscillation, and if you blink twice, you'll miss it. But you pull with your shoulders too far forward. Because you're a good puller, you snap yourself into the correct position, but your shoulders actually overcompensate behind the bar. And then they come back in the correct position. So watch carefully. You can
They're
see
too far forward and they pull back.
Yeah. like a hair behind the bar. like
it's such a slight thing.
like super subtly.
You're lucky you have long arms, Jennifer.
They don't help me with bench.
Margin there is so small.
It's very small. I mean, it's like I said, if I'm splitting hairs, I see that. That might be a consequence of the blind start position. But other than that, this looks like it works really well for you.
So for me, this wasn't my setup wasn't really strong, like very, very consistent until this fall, to be honest, which would have been probably 3.5 years in. And what I like about this setup is that not only was setting my hip height consistently a challenge, but I also, when I would be bending my knees to breathe, I'd be kicking the bar around and it would shoot out a couple inches away from me. I just didn't have a really good setup where right now I know the bar is right along my shins when I'm pulling and I'm coming straight up.
Yeah.
Right.
And I also had an issue where when I hinge back, my knees would come forward. And so by doing it this way, I can make sure I'm really hinging back and keeping my knees back.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it works really well for you. I think the only cautionary thing is just, on a third attempt, if you do get behind the bar like that on the start, you might have a kind of a hard time with it. But other than that, yeah, I think it works well for you. I think you've come a long way. It looks really good.
And one last quick thing to add before we move on, this head position. So if you keep a neutral head position, it really helps with proprioception of the position of the rest of your body, mostly your torso and your hips. Because if your head is like your sensory perceptive hub. And if you're looking straight up the whole time, then you don't really have a perception of the angle of your torso, right? Where if you're looking in the same angle of your torso, then you know really well where the rest of your torso is. So that could help a lot in the positioning throughout the concentric. Okay, cool. Let's go ahead and move on.
Thank you.
For sure. Oh, I could just full screen this. So we're going to do something a little bit different here. Nikhil, is this your athlete?
Yeah.
So let's try to spend like, I think we're over time already, 3 to 4 minutes on this. Let's explain.
Okay.
Is this the good version or the bad version?
That's the before we started. So maybe it was like the day he messaged me. So this is his squad before, I guess.
Let's do an overview of what you worked on here.
So one of the things, right? Okay, maybe I should let the video play a couple times.
Looks
So
like a high starting strength squat.
yeah, so I mean, obviously he's not able to hit depth, but I actually, when I saw this, like, and I know how he like lifts otherwise, like on lighter weights, I could tell that like he was definitely stronger than what it showed in his like 1 rep max attempts. One of the things was his arms, like the way his elbows are so far behind his
Yeah.
torso. It's almost like. When he starts coming up, because it's so far up, it just pushes the bar forward, so his chest, which is already in a tipped over position, it just collapses even more, and that makes his hitting depth even harder, because by the time he reaches the hole, he's so tipped forward, the weight is so far forward that if he tried to hit depth, his lower back would have to round or have to compensate in some way. So there was just like that main upper back grip was kind of messing his squat up a little. So if I show maybe then after, um, so this was his 275 like 2 weeks after. So I didn't have him like uh, focus too much on bringing his elbows forward as much as I wanted him to feel his chest be a little bit more up, but not just the chest be up, but also depressing his shoulders down so
Yeah.
that his upper body would be a little bit more tight while keeping chest up. And I basically told him to do it to a point where he can maintain that upper body tightness throughout the range of motion without there being any moving parts. So there shouldn't be any point of the lift with a light weight where his chest suddenly falls down, especially coming out of the hole, or his lower back suddenly extends or rounds. Basically, upper body should stay as like a rigid unit, and only the lower body is doing the work. So his quads and hamstrings are doing uh, most of the work, and that helped him uh, almost enter the hole a little bit more upright. And the weight now is, if you look at his feet and the bar, it's more in line like how I actually never used this term before, but after Jordan, Shane, and Joe have I've heard them use it, the center foot, like feeling what I usually draw it out on a picture and I show it to them, but I guess that makes total sense. Like his bar shifted in back a little to where in the hole it would line up with his the meat of his thighs, his center foot, his shoulders, and the bar, the weight, all are in a straight line. So there's no part of the force tipping him forwards or pulling him back. And then after that, this was like 4 weeks after we started. So the first video I think was 315. This is 350. So this was like significant weight. Like this
Yeah.
was way more than his 1 rep max that he'd ever squatted. So you can see that it now,
That's absolutely
obviously,
incredible how much more depth he's getting. The
yeah,
depth like comparison is insane. Like that
yeah,
first
because
video
now,
you showed, and then that like 4 inches more
yeah.
deeper.
And the crazy thing is, like, even now, even after that, it's just continued. Like he squatted 407 recently, and he hits depth. He's hit it in the mock meet, and so what I think that the main thing for him was so in this you can actually see it break down tiny bit, and the 350, because obviously it's a very heavy weight for him. He's never tried it before, but in the whole you can see his lower back again round a little, and I personally think that for him what worked was, first of all, keeping the chest up a little bit more and not giving up on that position for the chest, keeping shoulders depressed so his upper back stays more tight and doesn't have any moving parts, so it doesn't round or extend, and then just letting the legs do the work. Just that was like the main cue that we started with. We maybe switched a few things to help with like accessories and variations to help build his quads up too. So I gave him some high bar volume to, just learn how it feels to stay more upright. Because in a high bar, you're generally going to be more upright. So you're going to have to use your quads a little bit more and learn how to stay a little bit more upright. And doing that as an accessory after your comp squat kind of helped him take that, learning how to use the quads and keeping the chest up and applying to his low bar squat. And it worked for him. I don't know if this is something that can just be used as a, I mean, obviously it has to depend on the athlete, but for him, it's huge. It worked really well.
All right. So let's get Jacques' video done while he's still here. It's 8:59. We're about to wrap up, so we'll do Jacques, and that'll be the last one, and then I have a little surprise at the end of this as well. So let's see what we got. We got 41 seconds here. Let's see if I can clip up some of the setup. Interesting. Okay. All right, so right off the bat, I'm going to mention a couple quick things. It's a perfect video for this, a few heavy reps. So look at this bar path.
This is obviously high bar, right? This is high bar?
Yeah, it looks like it might be high bar.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's kind of hard to tell, but I think it's high bar.
Hello.
There you are.
Yeah, no, it is low bar. It was my first time doing low bar.
Ah,
Right.
My high bar is a higher position.
Oh, interesting.
And you can see that that I'm not wearing sleeves and I'm not wearing the belt. So I've been doing this, this whole month, with the exception of the first of the month where I went to like 5 or 385 with sleeves and a belt.
so
Nice.
the lift itself, it looks pretty good, but you could tell it's not dialed in, right? So I could kind of tell it's
It was my
maybe-
first time. It was my first time doing low bar in like, I don't know, 20 years.
Right.
I just wanted
So-
to see how much of a difference it would make.
So what I mean is, if you look at the bar now, let me see when the cap of the bar is perfect compared to the camera. So you don't see either side of the bar any more than others. So it's dead on with the camera. As you go through, okay, now the back side of the bar is gone. Now you can see the front, right? And that stays the same way throughout the entire concentric. And then you'll have it's kind of an exaggerated lockout. And it didn't actually recover on that one. It kind of recovers a little bit on this one, back to the neutral position. There we go. And so it kind of starts maybe in a more neutral position, maybe still a little bit too far back. Also, I can't really account for rotation of the bar, but it looks like there's not much bar rotation. So what I see is you start, like most people do, standing up with the bar over your center of mass. As you descend, the bar shifts backward. So the center of mass, I would guess, shifts from towards the center of the foot to the back of the foot, right, towards the heel. And that stays there, center of mass towards the heel, maybe a little bit more so toward the middle of the lift in the concentric phase, right? And you could even see, I don't know what your high bar looks like, but you have a modest forward knee position in the hole for a high bar squatter, even though this is your
Well,
low.
that was a low bar, but yeah.
Right. As a high bar
That was a low
squatter, it's a bit of a modest knee position, because I would still say for a low bar squat, I'd like to see a little bit of knee travel over the toe, right?
No, right.
Right. That was going to be my critique as well.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
you
Oh,
start
sorry.
in a really
I'm kind
you're
of going
starting in a really upright stack position with your pelvis under you, keeping your thoracic in a pretty good position. But what I would suggest is maybe just trying to let your chest lean forward a little more naturally, and just have a slight little bit more. Like, I noticed that as you're coming up, you're aggressively kind of tucking those hips in at the top. trying to let that chest lean naturally forward and feel out your midfoot a little more through your feet. So try to feel that foot pressure, feel that big toe, little toe heel. It looks like here you're really trying to heavily load the heel. Like, there's not a lot of pressure on the front of the foot. So trying to let
That was actually
that bar come.
That was actually
Sorry.
the third rep that I kind of drifted back. I do focus a lot on pushing through my midfoot.
Okay.
Perhaps it's because, I've been squatting like every other day and
Right.
without, yesterday, in fact, this is from like 3 days ago. Yesterday, I did 2 sets of 3 at 365, the same weight for pause reps.
Right.
So, I've also had 5 knee surgeries. So maybe, subconsciously, kind of
Sure.
like protecting that.
Potentially, yeah. Also, if this is your first time doing low bar squat in a while, it's gonna
Yeah,
pull.
yeah. I tried it. I
Right.
tried it yesterday at the beginning of the squats, and it really fucked with my left elbow. And I was like, nah. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So I went back to high bar, and like I said, I did 4 squats with 365 in a high bar position, and my elbows are, closer to in line with my torso when I have a high bar position.
Anything
Yeah, I
else?
mean,
I think moving from high bar to low bar, because I made that switch too. Moving the arms out helps keeping the elbows in a similar position as to your high bar, in the sense like not letting it be as back as it is.
Moving the
now in
arms
low
out.
bar.
What do you mean? You mean the hands
So
out?
like the grip out basically takes the stress off your body to have to keep the grip so close in, so your shoulder is more relaxed when you move it out. You're able to depress it more, and I noticed. I feel like that might help bring the elbows more in line with the torso. If you
And my pinkies
maybe
are on the inside of the rings.
your pinky is on the inside of the rings.
Yeah, that's how
Yeah,
tight I am.
as a, yeah, that's something that I feel like is something that you can test. Maybe moving like 2 fingers or 3 fingers out and just seeing if it feels any better.
Okay.
All right, so let's go ahead and move on. Unfortunately, I think we're gonna have to skip these 2 videos. There's just
That's
not
fine.
enough time. But one thing I want to go over is Cramsey gave me this idea. He sent me a video of myself in college,
Hell yeah.
variable conventional pull.
Come on, this.
But before we get to this, I decided to pull up the oldest lifting videos of each of our coaches so we can pull these apart. So
Hell yeah.
let's grab Shane's very first lifting video on Instagram and let's see how he fares.
2016. Damn.
I scrolled really, really far down.
TVP. Holy shit.
Okay.
All right. I have a couple
Yikes.
things I'm thinking.
Tear me apart.
These
6
are
by
really
3
good now.
20.
These are not that bad.
It's really not that bad.
Shame.
I mean, my hips are shooting up big time, but like,
This is my favorite.
I think
He's really selling that lockout.
Yeah.
yeah, the lockout. It's an aggressive lockout. Holy shit.
It is.
My biggest criticism is the shoes.
Yeah.
with
They're
no
like
socks.
canvas pencil type shoes that I had. I got them. I bought them for like $10 because I needed something to deadlift in, and I didn't want to spend. I didn't want to buy Converse, so that was the cheapest option.
Overall, not so bad.
Yeah.
What about that
no,
comment? What about that comment though? Did you guys see that?
those
those-
legs?
Those legs, nice work.
Yeah, it turns out New Zealand doesn't just export what's it called?
Not just lamb. It's
Lamb leg of lamb.
Yeah, actually, to be serious though, I think it looks pretty good. The main thing you already said was just your hip position's too low to start.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
But yeah, it looks
I
pretty
was
good.
like, because I tried conventional with my hamstring because I tore my hamstring 4 times. So every time I tried conventional, when I go heavy, my hamstring would start to tighten and I'd freak out. So someone was like, "Oh, just do sumo instead." And I think I watched some like YouTube videos of what's his name, Mark Bell or someone doing sumo, and
Oh my
that's how I
God.
learned. So here we go. Here we go.
All right.
Aw.
So this
Look at that.
is
What a
Nikito
cutie.
back in 2018.
Oh, that was such a
Damn,
bad
son.
rep,
See how
too.
he fares.
What do we got here? 230. Hell yeah.
The plate loading.
This is like
The
1
grip and rip
month
without the
into
rip.
powerlifting, so I'm just gonna say that.
All right.
Hey,
It's not bad.
your conventional's not bad.
You gave it.
Almost fell back.
It's better than my deadlift.
That guy just checked you out, I think.
All right. The three
That was
breath
so
pump
bad.
up.
That belt is horrendous.
Yeah, look at the belt.
That belt had an air bubble
Was it
in
one
the
of those
back.
like Harbinger belts? The one that's like big
Yeah,
at the back and skinny at the front?
oh man, and it had an air
Oh,
bubble in the
yeah.
back, and half of the air bubble did not exist anymore. So it was,
Yeah.
I don't know, how I survived it. I feel like I should have shattered my spine.
I just say his deadlift has evolved, but his hair has not.
Yeah. He's got that Harry Styles look going on there.
Yeah, and a bit of a strongman lockout. Your boy back here has some quads on it. Good. Overall, not bad.
Oh,
Nikhil, what gym is that?
That's in UK. It was called Performance Ground. I used to study there, so my club used to train there. It's amazing, but they
nice.
closed down during
Yeah,
lockdown.
yeah, it looks like a cool gym.
It was insane. All illegal. Everything was illegal.
Yeah.
Oh,
All right.
God.
Here we go. Skinny boy.
So Joe, this is his oldest lifting video, and unfortunately, it's a fantastic squat.
Yeah,
Really not,
there's really not much to pick apart. It looks
really
pretty
not much
good.
we can do here, but I had to include. There's Twams. I really include this for the Twams.
Holy Toledo. Look at that's the first time I've seen Twombly with long hair, not in a photo. So
R.I.P. the old gym.
All right, and then
Yeah.
what we've all been waiting for. This
yeah,
is
show us.
really rough. Just I have to preface it. This is my
Alright.
first time deadlifting over 500 pounds.
Holy shit. Yeah.
That is a look of pain, I think, on my face.
Did your spine shoot out your ass or?
Shortly after this, I decided to never pull conventional ever again.
Probably a good idea.
That was probably a good idea,
God,
honestly.
dude. The amount of flexion when you start pulling is
Yeah.
fucking
Crazy.
crazy. That's crazy.
Yeah.
I remember, and by the way, these were $5 shoes.
What is that shirt you're wearing?
It's
It
Florida.
looks like a turtleneck
Dude, it's got a
tank.
turtleneck with no sleeves.
That's what Steve Jobs would wear to the gym.
Yeah.
Turtleneck
Yeah.
with no sleeves is fucking crazy.
When you have an Apple meeting at 12 and a gym session at 1.
By the way, if I was to deadlift 500 pounds conventional today, it would look no different.
That's not true.
Really?
That is not true.
My conventional is
Dude,
that.
that's not true. I challenge you. That is not
It
true.
doesn't help that you have your mouth open the whole time. You're literally like,
Yeah.
go back and you can see the second that you like pull it off the ground, you're like, "Ah."
Well, one thing that we knew very well, because Zordo, if you turn the volume on, you can probably hear Zordo screaming at me. He taught us everything there is to know about periodization, but he was not one for technique. So I
Right.
learned very little.
That's evident.
I had to learn that on the streets, as they say, because
Yeah.
I did not have it back then.
That's hilarious.
Wow, you've come a long way.
Yeah, I like to think so. All right, so that's it. We went a little over time, but this was fun.
Yeah, it was good. We'll have to do another one.
I think so. I'll get this edited and posted up in the next day or so, and this would be a good reference if anybody has an issue that we talked about here, or if they just want to know how to diagnose themselves, or maybe learn a little bit more about cues that they've heard, then this would be a good one to point people to.
Definitely.
Sweet. All right.
All
Great.
Thanks for coming, guys.
Have a good one.
See you guys.
Have a good one, guys.